In the sleepy town of Meadow Creek, Martha, a sweet grandmother, hides a deadly secret. Decades ago, she was a top CIA operative. Now, when a ruthless gang targets her granddaughter, watch as Martha dusts off her forgotten skills to protect what matters most. The mop hit the floor with a wet slap, echoing through the empty Iron Dragon Martial Arts Academy in Highland Park, Colorado, where Nicole Bennett had spent 3 years invisible, forgotten, just another face in the shadows cleaning up after heroes who'd never bled for their country. Kyle Thunderfisher thought he knew what he was looking at. A tired janitor in worn jeans. Someone to mock, someone to humiliate for sport in front of his laughing students. He had no idea that beneath her rolled-up sleeves lay a Navy SEAL trident tattoo, or that his harmless fun challenge would unleash 11 seconds of precision that would shatter his world and remind everyone present that true warriors don't need uniforms to command respect. Quick pause before we continue. Tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing. Nicole Bennett pushed the yellow mop bucket across the polished floor of Iron Dragon Martial Arts Academy, its squeaky wheel cutting through the silence of the empty gym. At 34, she moved with an economy of motion that most people mistook for fatigue. But those who looked closer might have noticed something else, the controlled precision of someone who had learned that wasted energy could mean the difference between life and death. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, strands escaping to frame a face that carried lines earned not from age, but from squinting through desert sand and sleepless nights in places most people couldn't find on a map. The gym smelled of sweat, rubber mats, and the faint trace of industrial cleaner that had become Nicole's signature scent over the past 3 years. She preferred the night shift at Iron Dragon Academy. Fewer people meant fewer questions, fewer curious glances, fewer chances for someone to notice the way she instinctively scanned every room she entered, or how her shoulders tensed when someone approached from behind. The darkness outside the tall windows felt like an old friend, wrapping around the building like a protective shroud. Highland Park, Colorado, wasn't the kind of place that attracted attention. Nestled in a valley between modest mountains, it was the sort of town where everyone knew their neighbor's business but pretended they didn't. Where the biggest news was usually about the high school football team or the annual county fair. Nicole had chosen it precisely for its ordinariness, its ability to let her disappear into the background of small-town American life. She wrung out the mop and continued her methodical cleaning, working her way from the back of the gym toward the front desk. The walls were lined with photographs of students in their crisp white uniforms, beaming faces holding trophies and certificates. Master Henderson, the gym's 62-year-old owner, featured prominently in many of the older photos, his weathered face bearing the kind of dignity that came from years of military service. As a former Marine, he was one of the few people at Iron Dragon who looked at Nicole with something approaching understanding, though they rarely spoke beyond pleasantries. The front desk held the usual collection of gym paraphernalia, registration forms, class schedules, and a small American flag that Master Henderson insisted remain prominently displayed. Next to it sat a framed photo of his daughter, Rachel, 35 years old, with kind eyes and the tired smile of a single mother trying to hold everything together. Rachel managed the gym's day-to-day operations while raising her 8-year-old son, Connor, a shy boy who often did his homework in the corner while his mother worked late. Nicole paused in her cleaning, her attention caught by voices drifting from the back office. Master Henderson's growly voice mixed with his daughter's lighter tones, discussing something about Connor's troubles at Highland Park Elementary. The boy had been coming home with bruises lately, the kind that teachers dismissed as playground accidents, but that Nicole recognized as something more systematic. She had seen enough bullying in her time, both as a victim and as someone who had learned to fight back harder than most people thought possible. The conversation faded as Nicole moved toward the training area where the mat stretched across the floor in neat rectangles. This was where the magic happened during business hours, where students learned discipline, respect, and the ancient arts of self-defense. But it was also where Kyle Fisher held court. And just thinking about the 28-year-old instructor made Nicole's jaw tighten involuntarily. Kyle was everything Nicole had learned to distrust during her military service. Cocky, entitled, and convinced that his third-degree black belt made him invincible. He had earned his rank through years of dedicated training, there was no denying that. But he wore it like a badge of superiority rather than a symbol of responsibility. His nickname, Thunder, had started as a joke about his loud voice and tendency to show off, but Kyle had embraced it with the enthusiasm of someone who believed his own hype. She had been cleaning around Kyle's classes for 3 years, always keeping to the shadows, always making herself small and unremarkable, but recently, his comments had grown sharper, his glances more pointed. It was as if her very presence offended him. A reminder that not everyone in his world was there to admire his skills or laugh at his jokes. Nicole squeezed the mop harder than necessary, watching dirty water swirl in the bucket. She had survived 3 tours in Afghanistan, had earned combinations that sat locked in a storage unit she visited maybe twice a year, had led operations that remained classified even now. But here in Highland Park, she was just the cleaning lady. And most days that was exactly how she wanted it. The front door chimed, startling Nicole from her thoughts. She glanced at the clock on the wall. 9:30 p.m. Well past closing time, Master Henderson emerged from the back office. His graying hair slightly disheveled and his expression curious rather than concerned. Behind him came Rachel, holding Connor's hand as the sleepy boy rubbed his eyes. "Forgot my keys?" a familiar voice called out, and Nicole's shoulders tensed as Kyle Fisher strode into the gym with his usual swagger. He was still wearing his uniform from the evening class, the black belt tied with military precision around his waist. His sandy brown hair was perfectly styled despite the workout, and his blue eyes scanned the gym with the casual arrogance of someone who considered it his personal domain. "No problem," Master Henderson replied, tossing Kyle a set of keys from behind the desk. "Just lock up when you're done." Kyle caught the keys with one hand, a small show of reflexes that he seemed to think was impressive. His gaze swept across the gym and landed on Nicole, who had returned to her mopping with studied indifference. For a moment, his expression shifted to something almost calculating, as if he was sizing up an opponent rather than acknowledging an employee. "Still here, Nicole?" Kyle asked, his tone carrying a false friendliness that made her skin crawl. "Don't you have anything better to do on a Thursday night than hang around here?" Nicole kept her eyes on the floor, continuing to mop in steady, measured strokes. "Just finishing up," she replied quietly, her voice betraying none of the irritation building in her chest. Kyle took a step closer, his sneakers squeaking against the wet floor. "You know, I've been thinking, you're here so much watching all our classes. Maybe you think you've learned something. Maybe you think you could actually do what we do." Master Henderson and Rachel had paused in their conversation, both sensing a shift in the atmosphere. Connor, still drowsy, clung closer to his mother's leg. Nicole continued cleaning, but her movements became more deliberate, more controlled. "I'm just here to work," Nicole said, her voice still steady, but carrying a slight edge that Kyle missed entirely. "Come on." Kyle continued, warming to his theme. "I bet you've watched enough classes to think you know a move or two. What do you say? Want to step onto the mats and show us what the cleaning lady has learned?" The silence that followed was thick with tension. Master Henderson cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "Kyle, maybe." "No, it's fine," Kyle interrupted, his grin widening. "I'm genuinely curious. Nicole here has been our silent observer for 3 years. Don't you want to see what she's absorbed?" Nicole finally looked up, meeting Kyle's gaze directly for the first time. Her green eyes held depths that most people never bothered to explore. Depths that had seen things Kyle couldn't imagine. For a moment, something flickered across her face, not fear, not embarrassment, but a kind of weary recognition, as if she had known this moment would come eventually. "I don't think that's a good idea," she said simply, turning back to her mop. Kyle's expression shifted, his friendly mask slipping to reveal something uglier underneath. "Why not? Afraid you'll embarrass yourself? Or maybe you're afraid you'll embarrass me?" The last comment hung in the air like a challenge, and Nicole felt something stirring deep in her chest, something she had worked very hard to keep buried. She thought about the storage unit across town where her medals and combinations gathered dust next to photos of teammates who hadn't made it home. She thought about the nightmares that still visited her some nights, dreams filled with sand and blood and the weight of responsibility for lives that had depended on her skills. "Kyle," Master Henderson said, his voice carrying the authority of both rank and ownership. "That's enough." But Kyle was beyond listening, caught up in the momentum of his own arrogance. "Come on, Nicole. Just one round. I'll go easy on you. It'll be fun." The word fun hit Nicole like a physical blow. She had heard it before in different contexts from different people who thought they understood what they were asking for. Fun as if combat was entertainment. As if violence was a game. As if the skills that had kept her alive in places where fun meant you might live to see another sunrise could be reduced to gymnasium entertainment. Nicole set the mop aside and straightened slowly, her full height bringing her to just over 5'6". She wasn't imposing in any traditional sense, but something in her posture had changed. Something that made the spacious gym suddenly feel smaller. "You want to spar?" she said quietly, each word carefully measured. Kyle's grin returned wider than before. "That's the spirit. Don't worry, I'll take it easy on you." Nicole rolled up her sleeves methodically, revealing forearms that bore the lean muscle definition of someone who had never lifted weights for show, but had carried wounded teammates across hostile terrain. And there on her left forearm, partially hidden but unmistakable to those who knew what they were looking at, was the outline of a tattoo, an eagle perched on an anchor with a trident piercing through both. The Navy SEAL trident earned through months of the most brutal training the military had to offer. Master Henderson's eyes widened as he recognized the symbol, his Marine background providing instant context for what he was seeing. Rachel gripped Connor's hand tighter, sensing that something important was happening, even if she didn't understand what. Kyle, focused on his own excitement, missed the tattoo entirely. "All right then," Nicole said, her voice carrying a new quality. Not louder, but somehow more present, more commanding. 1 round, but when I win, you apologize. To me, to your teacher, and to everyone who has to listen to you run your mouth. Kyle laughed, the sound echoing off the gym walls. When you win. Nicole, honey, I don't think you understand what you're getting into. Nicole stepped toward the mats, her movements flowing with a kind of controlled grace that had nothing to do with martial arts forms and everything to do with muscle memory forged in combat. I understand perfectly, she said. The question is whether you do. As she reached the edge of the training area, Nicole paused and looked back at Master Henderson. In that look was a silent communication, veteran to veteran, warrior to warrior. Henderson gave an almost imperceptible nod, his weathered face showing a mixture of respect and anticipation. Kyle bounced on the balls of his feet, loosening his shoulders, and cracking his knuckles in an elaborate warm-up routine. He was still grinning, still playing to an audience that had grown uncomfortably quiet. This is going to be easier than I thought. He called out to no one in particular. Nicole stepped onto the mat, her worn sneakers silent against the surface. She didn't bounce or stretch or crack anything. Instead, she simply stood, feet shoulder-width apart, hands loose at her sides, breathing steady and controlled. To Kyle, she looked exactly like what he had always assumed she was, an out-of-shape civilian, pretending to be tougher than she really was. He had no idea that he was looking at someone who had earned her place among the most elite warriors in the world. Someone who had faced down enemies that would have sent him running for his mother. He had no idea that the quiet cleaning lady had been trained to kill with her bare hands, to move through hostile territory like a ghost, to make split-second decisions that could save or doom entire operations. As Kyle settled into his fighting stance, still smirking with confidence, Nicole remained perfectly still, but beneath that stillness, something ancient and terrible was awakening. Not anger, not hatred, but the cold, professional mindset that had once made her one of the most feared operatives in her unit. Kyle Fisher was about to learn that some storms once unleashed could level everything in their path. The confrontation was about to begin, and Highland Park, Colorado was about to witness something it would talk about for years to come. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Time seemed to crystallize as Nicole and Kyle faced each other across the mat. The fluorescent lights overhead cast harsh shadows between them, creating a stark battleground where years of assumption were about to collide with brutal reality. Kyle's confidence radiated from every fiber of his being as he settled into the formal stance he had practiced thousands of times. His black belt, a symbol of authority he had never questioned until this moment. Nicole remained motionless, her breathing so controlled it seemed she might not be breathing at all. Her green eyes tracked Kyle's every micro-movement with the kind of attention the combat veterans learned to apply when their lives depended on reading an enemy's intentions. She wasn't seeing Kyle Fisher, third-degree black belt and local gym celebrity. She was seeing target patterns, weak points, leverage opportunities, and timing windows that existed in the space between heartbeats. Master Henderson positioned himself near the edge of the mat, his military bearing evident as he assumed the role of unofficial referee. His weathered hands clasped behind his back in a posture that brought back memories of parade grounds and inspection formations. Rachel pulled Connor closer, the boy's sleepy confusion replaced by wide-eyed fascination as he sensed the electric tension filling the gymnasium. Whenever you're ready, Kyle announced, bouncing lightly on his toes in a display of athletic readiness that he assumed would intimidate his opponent. His sandy hair caught the overhead lighting and his uniform remained perfectly pressed despite the late hour. To any observer, he looked like the epitome of martial arts excellence. A poster image for disciplined training and competitive spirit. Nicole's response was to shift her weight almost imperceptibly, a movement so subtle that Kyle missed it entirely, but that Master Henderson recognized immediately. The older veteran's eyes narrowed as he watched the woman he had known only as a quiet employee transform into something else entirely. Her stance wasn't from any dojo manual, wasn't taught in belt progression classes, and certainly hadn't been learned by watching from the sidelines. The first exchange happened faster than most people could follow. Kyle launched forward with a picture-perfect jab, his form textbook accurate, his power generated through proper hip rotation and follow-through. It was a technique he had demonstrated hundreds of times to admiring students, a foundation strike that had earned him victories in tournament competition. Nicole wasn't there when his fist arrived. She had moved laterally, a flowing sweep that seemed to bend physics, carrying her out of the Kadak's path while maintaining perfect balance. Kyle's momentum carried him past empty air, and before he could reset his position, Nicole's hand touched his extended wrist with the lightness of a feather and the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. The contact lasted perhaps a tenth of a second, but it was enough to redirect his energy, sending him stumbling sideways as his own force worked against him. The gym fell silent except to the sound of Kyle's sneakers squeaking against the mat as he fought to regain his composure. His confident grin flickered like a candle in wind, uncertainty creeping across his features as he processed what had just happened. He had thrown a perfect technique, the kind of strike that should have connected against someone with no formal training. And somehow he had hit nothing but air. Lucky dodge, Kyle muttered more to himself than to anyone else. But the words carried no conviction. He reset his stance this time with more caution, his eyes studying Nicole's positioning with newfound respect. She hadn't moved into any recognizable guard position, hadn't adopted the formal stances he knew how to counter. Instead, she stood with an almost casual alertness that somehow seemed more dangerous than any aggressive posture. Behind the front desk, Rachel found herself holding her breath, her instincts warning her that she was witnessing something far beyond a friendly sparring match. Connor pressed against her leg, his 8-year-old mind struggling to understand why the nice cleaning lady suddenly looked so different, so focused, so utterly controlled. Kyle circled left, testing Nicole's reactions, looking for openings in her unorthodox positioning. His tournament experience told him to probe for weaknesses to establish distance and timing before committing to serious attacks. But every step he took seemed to be anticipated, matched by Nicole's subtle adjustments that kept her perfectly positioned without appearing to move at all. The second exchange began when Kyle attempted a low kick, targeting Nicole's lead leg in a technique designed to disrupt her balance and create an opening for follow-up strikes. His execution was flawless, the kind of attack that had swept opponents in competition, delivered with the speed and precision that had earned him his reputation. Nicole's response defied everything Kyle understood about combat timing. She didn't block the kick or dodge away from it. Instead, she moved into it, her leg lifting in a motion that looked almost casual until Kyle's shin connected with what felt like a steel post wrapped in silk. The impact sent shockwaves up his leg, and before he could process the pain, Nicole's foot was back on the ground, and her hand was pressing against his shoulder with just enough force to send him tumbling backward. Kyle hit the mat harder this time, the impact driving the air from his lungs and leaving him staring up at the ceiling lights in stunned confusion. The technique hadn't looked like anything from his extensive training, hadn't followed any of the principles he had spent years mastering. It had been economical, devastating, and executed with a calmness that was more unnerving than any display of aggression could have been. Master Henderson stepped forward slightly, his military-trained eyes recognizing patterns that civilian martial arts rarely encompassed. The efficiency of Nicole's movements, the way she seemed to waste no energy on unnecessary motion, the complete absence of telegraphed intentions, these were not the hallmarks of dojo training. This was something forged in environments where second chances didn't exist. "Get up, Kyle," Henderson commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had seen real combat and recognized its signature in Nicole's technique. There was no mockery in his tone, no encouragement for continued foolishness, only the grim recognition that his student was learning a lesson that couldn't be taught through forms and sparring drills. Kyle rolled to his feet, his uniform now wrinkled and his perfect composure cracked beyond repair. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the brief duration of the encounter, and his breathing had quickened beyond what the minimal physical exertion should have required. For the first time in years, he felt genuinely threatened in a martial arts context, faced with an opponent whose capabilities he couldn't assess or predict. "What the hell were you?" Kyle demanded, his voice tight with frustration and growing fear. The question came out louder than he intended, echoing off the gymnasium walls and emphasizing just how completely his confident facade had crumbled. Nicole's expression remained unchanged, her green eyes holding depths that spoke of experiences Kyle couldn't begin to imagine. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, but somehow filled the space more completely than Kyle's shout had managed. "I'm someone who learned to fight where it mattered." The words carried weight that pressed down on everyone present, loading the air with implications that transformed the gymnasium into something approaching sacred ground. Rachel found herself remembering news reports from distant wars, stories of service members who came home carrying invisible burdens from places where combat meant survival rather than sport. Kyle's third attempt was born of desperation rather than strategy. He rushed forward with a combination technique, throwing multiple strikes in rapid succession, hoping to overwhelm Nicole through sheer volume of attacks. His form remained technically sound, his power generation adequate, but his timing was off. Influenced by emotion rather than training, Nicole moved through his assault like water flowing around obstacles, each dodge precise and economical, her body seeming to bend reality as she occupied spaces that shouldn't have been available. Kyle's fists and feet found nothing but air, while Nicole's responses came in the form of gentle redirections that used his own momentum against him with surgical precision. The exchange lasted perhaps 5 seconds in real time, but felt like an eternity to Kyle, who found himself completely outclassed by someone who made combat look effortless. When Nicole finally ended the sequence with a simple palm strike to his solar plexus, delivered with just enough force to drop him to his knees without causing permanent damage, the silence that followed was profound. Kyle knelt on the mat, gasping for breath, his world fundamentally altered by the realization that everything he thought he knew about fighting had been revealed as elementary compared to what he had just experienced. The black belt around his waist, once a source of immense pride, now felt like a child's toy compared to the real-world lethality he had just encountered. Master Henderson approached Nicole with the measured steps of someone who recognized a fellow warrior. His weathered face showed no surprise, only the grim satisfaction of seeing truth revealed through action. "Navy?" he asked quietly, veteran intuition filling in the gaps that civilian observation might miss. Nicole nodded once, a simple acknowledgement that carried the weight of shared understanding between those who had served in harm's way. "SEALs," she confirmed, the single-word explanation sufficient for Henderson's military background to provide context. The revelation hit the gymnasium like a physical force. Rachel's hand went to her mouth in shocked recognition. Her understanding of the quiet cleaning lady transformed in an instant. Connor stared up at Nicole with the awe that 8-year-olds reserve for superheroes. Suddenly seeing someone who belonged in the action movies he watched with his friends. Kyle remained on his knees, processing the enormity of what had just occurred. He had challenged a Navy SEAL to single combat, had mocked someone whose qualifications made his black belt achievement seem quaint by comparison. The humiliation was complete, but beneath it was growing something more valuable. The beginning of genuine respect for capabilities that dwarfed his own. Nicole looked down at Kyle with an expression that held no triumph, no satisfaction in his defeat. Instead, her face showed the kind of weary patience that came from understanding the difference between necessary violence and casual cruelty. "Apologize," she said simply, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had led warriors in situations where leadership meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Kyle's head bowed, the fight completely drained out of him. The apology when it came was sincere in a way that surprised everyone present, including himself. "I'm sorry," he whispered, the words barely audible but carrying genuine remorse. "I'm sorry I underestimated you. I'm sorry I was disrespectful. I'm sorry. I thought I understood what real fighting looked like." The transformation in the gymnasium was palpable, as if the very air had been cleansed of the arrogance and false bravado that had poisoned it moments before. Nicole extended her hand to help Kyle to his feet, the gesture carrying more dignity than his defeat had stripped away. When he accepted her assistance, rising slowly with muscles that suddenly felt foreign and unreliable, something passed between them that transcended the simple dynamic of winner and loser. Master Henderson cleared his throat, his voice rough with emotion when he spoke. "Class dismissed," he announced it to the empty room, the formal words somehow appropriate for what had just concluded. Some lessons can only be learned through experience. As Kyle stood facing Nicole, his uniform disheveled and his pride reconstructed on entirely new foundations, the gymnasium seemed different somehow, smaller perhaps, but also more honest. The pretense had been stripped away, revealing truths that would reshape how everyone present understood courage, skill, and the hidden depths that ordinary people sometimes carry within themselves. The aftermath of revelation settled over Iron Dragon Academy like dust after an explosion. Kyle stood unsteadily, his worldview fundamentally restructured by 30 seconds of reality that had demolished years of comfortable assumptions. His uniform, once a symbol of achievement, now felt like a costume worn by someone playing at being a warrior. The gymnasium's familiar walls seemed to lean inward, pressing close with the weight of truth that had been hidden in plain sight for 3 long years. Nicole rolled her sleeves back down, covering the Navy SEAL trident tattoo that had served as her silent credential. The casual gesture carried finality as if she were closing a book she had never intended to open. Her breathing remained controlled, showing no signs of exertion from the encounter that had left Kyle questioning everything he thought he knew about combat proficiency. Master Henderson moved across the mat with the deliberate steps of someone processing new intelligence about a situation he thought he understood. His Marine Corps' background had taught him to recognize fellow warriors. But Nicole's camouflage had been so complete that even his trained instincts had been fooled. The cleaning uniform, the quiet demeanor, the careful invisibility, all of it made perfect sense now as the protective coloration of someone trying to blend into civilian life. "How long?" Henderson asked, his growly voice cutting through the silence. The question was economical, military in its precision, carrying layers of meaning that didn't require elaboration between veterans. 12 years active, Nicole replied, her tone matching his directness. 3 tours downrange. Team 6 for the last 4 years before I got out. The numbers hit Henderson like physical blows. Team 6, DEVRU, the Naval Special Warfare Development Group, represented the absolute pinnacle of special operations capability. These weren't weekend warriors or even regular SEALs. These were the operators called in when other special forces units needed backup. The tip of the spear that handled missions so classified that their existence was barely acknowledged. Rachel tightened her grip on Connor's hand, her understanding of the woman she had worked alongside for years undergoing radical revision. The quiet efficiency Nicole brought to her cleaning duties suddenly made sense in an entirely different context. Of course, someone trained to operate in hostile territory would approach janitorial work with systematic thoroughness. Of course, someone accustomed to life or death precision would notice every detail of her environment. Connor stared up at Nicole with eyes wide with wonder and confusion. At 8 years old, his understanding of military service came primarily from action movies and video games. Larger-than-life figures who bore no resemblance to the soft-spoken woman who had always smiled at him when their paths crossed. The disconnect between his expectations and reality was creating a cognitive earthquake that would reshape his understanding of heroism. Kyle slowly straightened his rumpled uniform, each movement careful and deliberate as muscles that had been systematically dismantled began to remember their proper function. His face bore the expression of someone who had glimpsed depths they hadn't known existed. Depths that made his previous confidence seem not just misplaced, but almost criminally naive. Why here? Henderson continued, his questions carrying the weight of genuine curiosity rather than mere politeness. Why Highland Park? Why cleaning? Nicole's green eyes moved across the gymnasium, taking in the familiar surroundings that had provided sanctuary for 3 years of careful anonymity. The American flag in the corner, the photographs of smiling students, the equipment that represented discipline and tradition, all of it had become part of her healing process, even if she had never consciously acknowledged it. Sometimes you need to disappear, she said finally, her voice carrying undertones of experiences that civilian life couldn't quite accommodate. Sometimes you need to do something useful that doesn't require decisions about who lives and who dies. The words hung in the air like smoke from distant battles, carrying implications that pressed against the comfortable boundaries of small-town existence. Rachel found herself remembering news reports from Afghanistan, stories of operations conducted in shadows by warriors whose names would never appear in history books, but whose actions shaped the world in ways that civilians would never fully comprehend. Kyle's voice cracked slightly when he spoke, uncertainty replacing the aggressive confidence that had defined him just minutes earlier. I had no idea. Jesus, Nicole, I had no idea who you were. You weren't supposed to, Nicole replied without malice, her tone carrying the patience of someone who had learned to navigate the complex terrain between military experience and civilian incomprehension. That was the point. Henderson nodded slowly, recognition dawning in his weathered features as pieces of a puzzle he hadn't known existed began falling into place. The way Nicole moved through the building after hours, checking corners and exits with unconscious thoroughness. The way she positioned herself in any room to maintain situational awareness. The way she seemed to disappear into backgrounds, becoming invisible through practiced skill rather than accidental oversight. Psst. Henderson asked quietly, the question carrying the careful neutrality of someone who understood the weight such diagnosis could bear. Nicole's pause was answer enough, though she eventually nodded with the resignation of someone who had learned to acknowledge invisible wounds alongside visible ones. Among other things, the VA docs have their theories, but mostly I just needed time to figure out how to exist without constantly scanning for threats. The admission transformed the gymnasium into something approaching a confessional sacred space where truths too heavy for casual conversation could finally be spoken aloud. Connor pressed closer to his mother, sensing emotional currents he couldn't quite understand, but recognizing their importance through the adult's careful attention. Rachel cleared her throat softly, drawing attention with the gentle authority of someone who had learned to manage difficult situations through years of single parenthood. Nicole, I want you to know that nothing changes from our perspective. Your job is secure for as long as you want it. But if there's anything we can do to help, I appreciate that. Nicole interrupted gently, her expression softening with genuine gratitude. But I chose this work because it let me contribute without complications. I don't need special treatment or accommodation. I just need to keep moving forward. Kyle shifted uncomfortably, his athletic frame somehow diminished by the weight of newfound understanding. The easy arrogance that had carried him through years of tournament competition had been replaced by something approaching humility. Though the transformation was still too fresh to feel natural. What can I do? Kyle asked, his voice carrying sincere remorse that surprised everyone present, including himself. How do I make up for being such an ass? Nicole studied him for a long moment, her evaluation process visible in the careful attention she paid to his posture, his expression, his tone. It was the same systematic assessment she had applied to potential threats and allies and operational environments adapted now for the considerably lower stakes of civilian interpersonal dynamics. You can learn, she said finally. You can remember that you don't know what battles other people have fought or what scars they carry. You can teach your students that real strength doesn't need to prove itself against people who aren't threats. The lesson landed with the force of revelation, reshaping Kyle's understanding of martial arts instruction in ways that years of traditional training had never accomplished. His black belt, earned through dedication and technical proficiency, suddenly seemed incomplete without the deeper wisdom that came from understanding the difference between sport and survival. Henderson moved toward the front desk, his movements carrying the deliberate purpose of someone who had reached a decision. From behind the counter, he retrieved a small wooden box, its surface worn smooth by years of careful handling. Inside, nestled in faded velvet, Leia's own military decorations, Bronze Star, Purple Heart, Combat Action Ribbon. Medals earned in places where the difference between heroism and survival often came down to split-second decisions. I keep these here, Henderson said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. To remind myself why we teach what we teach. It's not about trophies or tournaments or proving who's toughest. It's about preparing people to face whatever darkness they might encounter. He closed the box carefully, returning it to its place of honor behind the desk. The gesture carried ritualistic weight, acknowledgement of shared understanding between warriors who had seen the world's sharp edges and lived to carry those experiences into civilian life. Nicole watched the ceremony with recognition, understanding the significance of Henderson's disclosure. In her own storage unit across town, similar decorations gathered dust alongside photographs of teammates who hadn't made it home. Memories too heavy for daily carrying but too important for complete abandonment. The clock on the gymnasium wall showed nearly 10:30, well past the hour when normal people would have concluded their business and headed home. But nothing about this encounter qualified as normal, and the participants seemed reluctant to break the spell that truth-telling had cast over the familiar space. Connor yawned hugely, the late hour finally overcoming his fascination with the evening's revelations. Rachel smoothed his hair with maternal automaticity, her mind processing the implications of having employed a decorated special operations veteran as their night janitor for 3 years without ever suspecting her true background. "We should probably head home," Rachel said softly, though her tone suggested reluctance to end what had become an unexpectedly profound experience. "Connor has school tomorrow, and we all need time to process what's happened here." Nicole nodded agreement, though her own definition of processing would likely involve the kind of solitary reflection that had become her primary method for managing information that didn't fit neatly into civilian categories. The evening had stripped away carefully constructed anonymity, exposing her to the kind of attention she had spent years avoiding. Kyle remained near the center of the mat, his posture reflecting someone still struggling to integrate new reality with previous assumptions. The physical defeat had been comprehensive but brief. The psychological recalibration would take considerably longer to complete. "Nicole," he said hesitantly, his voice carrying uncertainty that would have been unthinkable hours earlier, "would you be willing to teach me? Not fighting techniques. I can see now that I don't understand fighting at all. But maybe you could help me understand what I've been missing about what we do here." The request surprised everyone present, including Kyle himself. It represented a complete inversion of the power dynamic that had defined their previous interactions, transforming the arrogant instructor into a humble student seeking wisdom from someone he had previously dismissed as insignificant. Nicole considered the proposal carefully, weighing potential complications against possible benefits. Teaching would require her to articulate concepts that had become instinctual to translate experiences gained in classified operations into lessons appropriate for civilian consumption. It would mean increased visibility, greater engagement with the community she had worked so hard to observe from the margins. "We'll see," she said finally, the non-committal response carrying enough possibility to keep hope alive while preserving her option to retreat back into protective anonymity. "Right now, let's just focus on getting through tomorrow." The answer satisfied everyone's immediate needs while deferring more complex decisions to a future when emotions had settled and implications could be properly evaluated. Henderson nodded approval of Nicole's caution, recognizing the wisdom of someone who had learned to consider second and third order effects before committing to courses of action. As the group prepared to disperse, the Iron Dragon Academy felt fundamentally changed despite its unchanged physical appearance. Secrets had been revealed, assumptions challenged, and relationships redefined in ways that would ripple through the Highland Park community for months to come. The quiet cleaning lady had been revealed as something far more significant, and nothing would ever be quite the same again. 3 days passed before Nicole returned to Iron Dragon Academy. 3 days during which Highland Park's tight-knit community buzzed with whispered conversations and sideways glances. Word had leaked, as word always does in small towns, though the details grew more elaborate with each retelling. By Tuesday morning, the local diner hosted animated discussions about the mysterious woman who had supposedly defeated 3 black belts simultaneously, stories that bore little resemblance to the quiet confrontation that had actually occurred. Nicole pushed through the academy's front door at 11 o'clock in the morning, an unprecedented daylight appearance that drew immediate attention from the handful of students practicing forms near the windows. She wore civilian clothes, dark jeans, and a simple gray sweater that concealed her tattoos, but carried herself with the controlled alertness that had become her signature among those who knew what to look for. The gymnasium felt different in natural light, less intimate than the fluorescent-lit cave where secrets had been revealed. Desmos danced through sunbeams streaming between the blinds, creating ethereal patterns across mats that showed scuff marks from years of dedicated training. The American flag in the corner hung motionless in the still air, a silent witness to the transformed dynamics that now governed this space. Rachel looked up from her position behind the front desk, her expression mixing relief with carefully controlled curiosity. She had spent the intervening days fielding phone calls from parents whose children attended classes, neighbors who had heard fragments of impossible stories, and even a reporter from the Highland Park Gazette who somehow learned that something newsworthy had occurred at the local martial arts academy. "Nicole," Rachel said, her voice carrying warmth tinged with concern. "How are you holding up?" "I've been better," Nicole admitted, settling into one of the plastic chairs that faced the desk. "Word's gotten around, hasn't it?" Rachel's gruffle smile provided all the confirmation Nicole needed. Highland Park boasted a population of just over 12, small enough that genuine secrets rarely remained hidden for long. The combination of Kyle's obvious attitude adjustment and Master Henderson's sudden respectful deference toward the cleaning lady had created curiosity that proved impossible to contain. "Mrs. Hartley called yesterday," Rachel continued, referring to the elderly woman who functioned as the town's unofficial information hub. "She wanted to know if we were hiring that decorated war hero to teach self-defense classes. Apparently, someone told her, you single-handedly took down a group of armed terrorists." Nicole winced at the embellishment, recognizing how civilian imaginations transformed military service into Hollywood fantasy. The reality of her operations, careful planning, methodical execution, life-or-death decisions made in environments where mistakes meant teammates didn't come home, bore no resemblance to the action movie scenarios that populated small-town gossip. "Where's Kyle?" Nicole asked, changing the subject before the conversation could delve deeper into topics that remained classified despite her retirement from active duty. "Teaching the noon class," Rachel replied, gesturing toward the main training area where a dozen adult students worked through basic combinations under Kyle's supervision. "He's been different since Thursday night, quieter, more thoughtful. I think you shook him up pretty thoroughly." Nicole watched Kyle through the office doorway, noting the subtle changes in his instructional style. Gone were the ostentatious demonstrations of technique, replaced by careful attention to individual students' needs. His movements retained their technical precision, but lacked the aggressive flair that had previously characterized his teaching. He looked smaller somehow, not physically diminished, but psychologically recalibrated by exposure to capabilities that dwarfed his own. Connor burst through the Academy's front door with the unstoppable energy of an 8-year-old released from school, his backpack bouncing against his narrow shoulders as he spotted Nicole and changed direction like a guided missile seeking its target. The boy had been practically vibrating with excitement since Thursday evening, his young mind struggling to reconcile the quiet cleaning lady with the superhero figure his imagination had constructed. "Nicole," Connor exclaimed, skidding to a stop beside her chair, "Mom said you were a real soldier. Did you really fight bad guys? Do you know how to fly helicopters? Can you teach me how to do that thing where you made Kyle fall down?" Rachel moved to intercept her son's enthusiasm before it could overwhelm their guest. "Connor, remember what we talked about? Nicole's experiences aren't entertainment, and she doesn't owe us stories about things that might be private." Connor's face fell slightly, but his curiosity remained undaunted. "But she's like a real-life superhero, right?" Nicole studied the boy's eager expression, seeing in his face the kind of uncomplicated admiration she had once felt for the warriors who had inspired her own military service. But she also recognized the danger of mythologizing experiences that were far more complex and painful than 8-year-old imaginations could accommodate. "I was a soldier," Nicole said carefully, her voice gentle but serious. "That meant I had to do difficult things in dangerous places. But real soldiers aren't superheroes, Connor. We're just people who trained hard to protect other people. And sometimes we got hurt, and sometimes we made mistakes, and sometimes we lost friends." The explanation carried enough reality to temper Connor's excitement without crushing his respect for military service. He nodded solemnly, processing information that added depth to his understanding of adult responsibilities and sacrifice. Master Henderson emerged from his private office, moving with the careful precision of someone whose joints carried decades of accumulated damage from training and combat. His weathered face showed no surprise at Nicole's presence, suggesting he had been expecting this conversation since the moment her cover had been blown. "Figured you'd show up eventually," Henderson said, settling into the chair beside Nicole with a grunt of discomfort. "Question is whether you're here to quit or to figure out what comes next." Nicole appreciated his directness, the military efficiency that cut through civilian politeness to address core issues without elaborate preamble. She had spent 3 sleepless nights wrestling with exactly the question he had posed, weighing her desire for continued anonymity against the reality that her secret was now public knowledge. "I don't know," she admitted. "Part of me wants to pack up and find another town where nobody knows my history, but part of me is tired of running from who I used to be." Henderson nodded, understanding his own experience providing context for the complex negotiations between military identity and civilian existence. "Running gets exhausting after a while. Trust me, I tried it for years after I got out. But eventually you realize that hiding from your service doesn't make the memories go away. It just makes them harder to carry." Through the office doorway, Kyle's class had moved to partner drills. students working through defensive techniques with the careful attention that his revised teaching style now demanded. Several glanced toward the office, their curiosity evident despite attempts at discretion. Nicole could feel the weight of their attention, the transformation from invisible employee to subject of fascination. "The phone's been ringing all morning," Rachel interjected quietly. "Parents wanting to know about our special instructor. The mayor's office called asking if we'd consider offering self-defense classes for city employees. Channel 7 News wants to do a feature story about veterans in the community." Nicole's expression tightened at the mention of media attention, her instincts recoiling from the kind of public exposure that special operations careers were designed to avoid. The idea of cameras and interviews, of having her photograph published alongside sensationalized accounts of her service, violated every protocol she had internalized during her years in the shadows. "I can't do interviews," Nicole said firmly. "There are operational security concerns, classification issues. Even retired, some things have to stay buried." Henderson waved dismissively. "Nobody's asking you to reveal state secrets, but you might consider that this community could benefit from understanding what real service looks like. Not the Hollywood version, not the political talking points, but the actual experience of people who put their lives on the line for others." Connor had been listening with the focused attention that children applied to adult conversations they sensed were important. Even when the nuances escaped their understanding, his innocent voice cut through the complex considerations with characteristic 8-year-old directness. "Are you going to keep cleaning the gym?" Connor asked. "Because if you're a famous soldier now, maybe you don't have to clean up after people anymore." The question drew chuckles from the adults, but Nicole recognized the deeper wisdom in Connor's simple observation. Her janitorial work had served as more than employment. It had been therapeutic camouflage, allowing her to contribute to something constructive while maintaining the emotional distance necessary for healing from invisible wounds. "I like cleaning," Nicole said honestly. "It's peaceful work that lets me think without having to make decisions that affect other people's lives." "Sometimes that's exactly what you need." Kyle's class concluded with formal bows and respectful dismissals, students filing toward the changing areas while their instructor approached the office with obvious reluctance. His face bore the expression of someone who had spent 3 days processing uncomfortable truths about himself and his profession. "Nicole," Kyle said hesitantly, stopping at the office doorway, "could I talk to you for a minute?" Privately, Rachel gathered Connor and retreated toward the back office, understanding that some conversations required space free from curious observers. Henderson remained seated, his presence carrying the authority of both ownership and veteran status, but he made no effort to dominate the interaction. Kyle entered the office and took the remaining chair, his movements lacking the confident swagger that had once defined his presence. His uniform was perfectly pressed, his belt properly tied, but something fundamental had shifted in the way he inhabited his role as instructor. "I've been thinking about what happened," Kyle began, his voice carrying none of its former arrogance, "about what I thought I knew and what I actually know. And I realized I've been teaching people to fight without understanding what fighting really means." Nicole studied his face, noting the genuine contrition that had replaced his previous cockiness. The transformation appeared authentic, though she retained enough skepticism to wait for actions that would confirm whether his attitude adjustment was permanent or merely temporary embarrassment. "What do you want from me?" Nicole asked directly, cutting through potential pleasantries to address his underlying motivation. Kyle's pause suggested he was still formulating his request, still working through implications he hadn't fully considered. When he spoke, his words carried the careful precision of someone who had learned that casual statements could have serious consequences. "I want to understand what I've been missing," Kyle said finally. "Not so I can fight like you, I know that's not possible, but so I can teach people something real instead of just technique. So I can help them understand the difference between martial arts and actual combat readiness." The request was more thoughtful than Nicole had expected, suggesting that Kyle's humiliation had catalyzed genuine introspection rather than mere wounded pride. She recognized the desire to transform embarrassing defeat into educational opportunity, though she remained uncertain whether civilian instruction could accommodate the realities of military combat experience. "Teaching real combat applications is complicated," Nicole warned. "Most of what I learned was specific to operational environments that civilians will never encounter. The legal implications alone would make it impossible to teach properly." "Then teach me the mindset," Kyle pressed. "Teach me how to prepare people mentally for situations where training matters. Help me understand what I should be telling students about the responsibility that comes with fighting skills." The conversation was developing depth that Nicole hadn't anticipated, moving beyond simple requests for physical techniques toward more complex questions about the psychological and ethical dimensions of combat training. She found herself genuinely considering Kyle's proposal, weighing potential benefits against the risks of increased visibility and community engagement. Master Henderson cleared his throat, drawing attention back to broader considerations that extended beyond Kyle's personal education. This isn't just about what Kyle needs to learn, Henderson pointed out. This is about what this community could gain from having someone with your background help people understand what service and sacrifice actually mean. The weight of expectation was building around Nicole like atmospheric pressure before a storm, pushing her toward decisions she had hoped to avoid. Highland Park's small-town dynamics had transformed her from anonymous employee to reluctant celebrity, creating obligations she neither wanted nor felt prepared to handle. But beneath her resistance, something else was stirring, a recognition that her isolation, while protective, had also been limiting. For 3 years, she had contributed nothing beyond clean floors and empty trash bins. Perhaps the time had come to offer something more meaningful, even if it meant accepting the complications that would inevitably follow. Friday afternoon brought an unexpected visitor to Iron Dragon Academy, arriving in the form of Captain Thomas Bell, whose weathered military bearing announced his professional background before he spoke a single word. Nicole recognized him instantly, despite the civilian clothes and the gray that had crept into his dark hair during the 2 years since their last meeting. Her former commanding officer moved through the gymnasium's entrance with the measured steps of someone accustomed to evaluating tactical situations, his pale blue eyes scanning the facility with professional thoroughness. "Heard through the grapevine that you'd surfaced," Bell said without preamble, settling into the chair across from Nicole's position behind the front desk. His voice carried the growly quality that came from years of shouting orders over helicopter rotors and explosions, tempered now by the careful modulation required for his current role as a Veterans Affairs counselor. Nicole felt her shoulders tense involuntarily, old habits reasserting themselves in the presence of command authority. Despite her retirement from active duty, some responses remained hardwired into her nervous system, automatic reactions that civilian life hadn't completely overridden. "Captain," she acknowledged, her tone respectful but guarded. "Tom," he corrected gently, "we're both civilians now, remember? Though I hear you've been making quite an impression on the local martial arts community." The comment carried enough humor to ease some of Nicole's tension, though she remained alert to the possibility that Bell's visit involved more than casual social checking. Their relationship during her active duty years had been built on mutual respect and operational necessity. But command dynamics didn't dissolve easily. Even in retirement, Rachel emerged from the back office, her expression curious as she took in the new arrival. Bell's military bearing was unmistakable, even in civilian clothes, and his focused attention on Nicole suggested this wasn't a chance encounter. She moved to the filing cabinet near the desk, ostensibly organizing paperwork, but clearly interested in the conversation unfolding before her. "What brings you to Highland Park?" Nicole asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. The Veterans Affairs Network functioned as an informal intelligence system, sharing information about personnel who might need support or intervention. Her public exposure at Iron Dragon Academy had probably triggered automated alerts in databases designed to track potentially at-risk veterans. Bell's expression grew more serious, the casual friendliness shifting toward professional concern. "Your old teammate Jake Morrison called the regional office. Said he heard from a buddy who heard from a cousin that you'd gotten into some kind of altercation that revealed your background. Wanted to make sure you were handling the transition okay." The mention of Morrison's name brought back memories Nicole had been working hard to compartmentalize. Jake had been her partner on 3 separate operations, a steady presence whose reliability had helped keep their entire team alive during some of the darkest missions of their deployment cycle. His concern, filtered through multiple layers of military communication networks, represented the kind of brotherhood that civilian life rarely replicated. "I'm managing," Nicole replied, though the words sounded defensive even to her own ears. "It wasn't planned, but I'm dealing with the consequences." "Are you though?" Bell pressed gently, his tone carrying the careful neutrality of someone trained to recognize when veterans were struggling with reintegration challenges. "Because exposing your operational background to civilian scrutiny can trigger all kinds of psychological responses that you might not see coming." Master Henderson chose that moment to emerge from his office, drawn by voices he didn't recognize, but instinctively identifying as carrying military authority. His weathered face showed recognition as he took in Bell's bearing and demeanor, understanding immediately that this conversation involved matters beyond casual social interaction. "Master Henderson," Nicole said, performing introductions with military efficiency, "this is Captain Thomas Bell, my former commanding officer. Tom, Master Henderson owns this place. Former Marine. Served in Gulf War." The 2 older veterans acknowledged each other with a subtle nods that marked recognition between professionals who had served in different branches, but understood common experiences. Henderson's expression suggested approval of Bell's presence, as if military oversight of Nicole's situation was both expected and appropriate. Kyle's afternoon class had concluded, and he approached the front desk area with the careful deference that had replaced his previous swagger. His interaction with Bell was noticeably different. Respectful without the underlying competitive edge that had once characterized his behavior around authority figures he didn't recognize as superior. Sir Kyle said, offering his hand to Belle with genuine respect. Kyle Fisher, instructor here. I am the one who made the mistake of challenging Nicole without understanding who she really was. Belle accepted the handshake while studying Kyle's face with the evaluative attention of someone trained to assess personnel under stress. How's that working out for you? He asked with slight amusement. It's been educational, Kyle admitted, his tone carrying none of the bravado that might have characterized such an admission weeks earlier. Turns out I had some serious gaps in my understanding of what combat actually involves. The conversation was developing layers that Nicole hadn't anticipated, transforming what she had expected to be a simple welfare check into something approaching an informal intervention. Belle's presence was analyzing discussions about her role in the community that she had been trying to avoid, forcing her to articulate decisions she hadn't yet fully made. Connor burst through the front door with his usual afternoon energy, fresh from Highland Park Elementary and ready to share the day's adventures with anyone willing to listen. His backpack hit the floor with a thud as he spotted the unfamiliar adult and immediately shifted into the polite mode the 8-year-olds deployed around new grown-ups. Mom, there's another military guy here, Connor announced with the kind of volume control that children his age had not yet mastered. Are you collecting soldiers now? Rachel's face screamed with embarrassment, but Belle chuckled at Connor's observation. Sharp, kid, he commented. Most civilians don't pick up on military bearing that quickly. Connor's been learning about different kinds of service since Nicole's background came out, Henderson explained. Kids got good instincts about reading people. Belle turned his attention to Nicole with renewed focus, his expression suggesting that Connor's casual comment had reinforced concerns he had been developing about her situation. How many people know about your background now? He asked quietly. Too many, Nicole admitted, frustration bleeding through her careful control. Word spreads fast in small towns. I went from invisible to locally famous in about 72 hours. And how's that sitting with you psychologically? Belle pressed, his question carrying the weight of professional concern rather than casual curiosity. Because sudden exposure after years of isolation can trigger some pretty serious adjustment reactions. The directness of his inquiry cut through Nicole's defensive barriers, forcing her to confront aspects of her situation she had been avoiding. The nightmares that had returned since Thursday's confrontation, the hypervigilance that had increased as more people learned her identity, the conflicted feelings about community recognition she neither wanted nor felt she deserved. I've been better, she conceded, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. The attention is complicated, Belle nodded understanding, his expression reflecting familiarity with the complex psychological terrain that Special Operations veterans navigated during civilian reintegration. His current role at the Veterans Affairs Office had exposed him to dozens of similar cases. Warriors struggling to find purpose and peace after careers defined by controlled violence and absolute commitment. Rachel had been listening with growing concern, her maternal instincts extending beyond Connor to encompass the woman who had become part of their extended family through 3 years of quiet reliability. Her voice carried gentle authority when she spoke, the tone she used when Connor needed guidance through difficult emotional territory. Nicole, what do you need from us? Rachel asked directly. How can we help you navigate this without making things worse? The question was simple but profound, offering support without demands, assistance without judgment. Nicole felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of defensive barriers that had been her primary protection since leaving active duty. The offer represented the kind of unconditional backing she had only experienced within military units, extended now by civilians who had no obligation beyond basic human decency. I need time to think, Nicole said finally. And I need to know that if I decide to engage more with the community, it won't turn into a circus. I can't handle reporters and ceremonies and all the things that people think veterans want. Belle's expression showed understanding mixed with professional assessment. What about something smaller, more controlled, maybe helping Kyle understand the psychological aspects of combat training without getting into operational details? Kyle straightened at the mention of his name, his attention sharpening as the conversation moved toward practical applications of Nicole's expertise. His earlier request for mentorship had been genuine, driven by recognition that his martial arts instruction lacked crucial dimensions that only real combat experience could provide. I meant what I said about wanting to learn, Kyle interjected, his voice carrying sincerity that surprised everyone present, including himself. Not fighting techniques. I understand that's not appropriate, but the mental aspects, the responsibility that comes with teaching people to defend themselves. The stuff that can't be learned from books or videos. Nicole studied Kyle's face, noting the absence of his former arrogance and the presence of something approaching humility. His transformation appeared genuine, though she retained enough caution to wonder whether his changed attitude would survive the test of time and normal routine. Teaching psychology is different from teaching technique, Nicole warned. It means talking about fear, about decision-making under stress, about the difference between sport fighting and actual violence. Some of it gets pretty dark. I think I need to hear it. Kyle replied quietly, because what happened here last week showed me how much I didn't understand about what I was teaching. My students deserve better than ignorance dressed up as expertise." Henderson had been listening with the focused attention of someone evaluating a business decision that would affect his entire operation. His academy had built its reputation on traditional martial arts instruction, emphasizing discipline and respect alongside physical technique. Adding psychological combat training would represent a significant departure from established protocols. "What would something like that look like?" Henderson asked, directing the question to both Nicole and Belle. "How would we structure instruction that covers mental preparation without crossing lines that shouldn't be crossed?" Belle leaned forward, his professional interest engaged by the practical challenge of translating military psychology into civilian application. His Veterans Affairs work had taught him about the civilian appetite for understanding military experience balanced against the necessity of protecting operational security and veteran privacy. "Start small," Belle suggested. "Maybe one session a week focused on situational awareness and threat assessment. Nothing classified, nothing operational, just the basic mental tools that help people stay safe in an uncertain world." The suggestion carried enough specificity to feel achievable while remaining vague enough to avoid immediate commitment. Nicole found herself genuinely considering the possibility for the first time since Kyle's initial request, weighing potential benefits against the personal cost of increased visibility and community engagement. Connor, who had been listening with the patient attention the children deployed when adult conversations touched on subjects they found fascinating, raised his hand as if he were in school asking for permission to speak. His gesture drew chuckles from the adults, but they waited respectfully for his contribution to the discussion. "If Nicole teaches people how to be safe," Connor said with 8-year-old logic, "maybe the bad kids at school won't be able to pick on people anymore. Maybe everyone will know how to protect themselves." The innocent observation cut to the heart of what civilian self-defense training was supposed to accomplish, stripping away the complex considerations about military experience and psychological preparation to focus on the fundamental goal of helping people protect themselves and others from harm. Nicole felt something shift in her perspective as she considered Connor's simple wisdom, recognizing that her reluctance to engage might be denying the community benefits that had nothing to do with her personal comfort or privacy concerns. Perhaps the time had come to stop hiding from her experience and start using it to serve something larger than her own need for anonymity. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made Highland Park's mountain setting feel like a postcard. But Nicole's stomach churned with anticipation as she approached Iron Dragon Academy for what she had reluctantly agreed to call her first consultation session. The weekend had been consumed with preparation that felt more daunting than mission planning had ever been during her active duty years. Teaching civilians about psychological readiness required different skills than leading elite operators through hostile territory. The gymnasium buzzed with unusual energy as Nicole entered, noting immediately that the normal complement of morning students had been supplemented by several faces she didn't recognize. Word about the special lesson had apparently spread beyond the academy's regular membership, drawing curiosity seekers and genuine students in roughly equal measure. The attention made her skin crawl, triggering hypervigilance responses she had hoped were under better control. Kyle stood near the center of the mat, wearing a clean uniform that somehow looked different on him now, less like a costume and more like work clothes. His posture reflected the careful attention of someone who understood that he was about to receive education that couldn't be found in any manual or instructional video. Behind him, a semicircle of 12 students waited with expressions ranging from eager anticipation to skeptical curiosity. Master Henderson positioned himself near the American flag, his weathered face showing the kind of solemn respect that Marines reserve for ceremonies honoring fallen comrades. He had spent Sunday afternoon helping Nicole structure her presentation to avoid classified material while maintaining educational value, their collaboration revealing shared understanding of the delicate balance between military experience and civilian instruction. "Good morning," Nicole began, her voice carrying across the gymnasium with the kind of projection that came from years of briefing operations in noisy environments. "Before we start, I need everyone to understand what this is and what it isn't. This isn't combat training. This isn't self-defense instruction. This is about developing situational awareness and threat assessment skills that can help you stay safe in everyday situations." Rachel watched from behind the front desk, Connor beside her, working on homework that he was obviously ignoring in favor of the unfolding lesson. The boys' would-seat attention reminded Nicole of her own childhood fascination with adult activities that seemed to carry weight beyond their apparent simplicity. Travis Bulldog Green sat in the front row, his former college wrestling background evident in the way he held his stocky frame. Beside him, Mrs. Helen Sanders represented the Academy's senior membership, her 67 years of life experience bringing different expectations than the younger students who surrounded her. The demographic mix created teaching challenges Nicole hadn't anticipated when she agreed to Belle's suggestion. How many of you have been in situations where you felt unsafe? Nicole asked, beginning with a question designed to establish common ground between military and civilian experience. Not necessarily dangerous, just uncomfortable enough to make you pay attention to your surroundings. Hands rose throughout the semicircle, including Mrs. Sanders, whose expression suggested memories of specific incidents that had shaped her understanding of personal security. The universal response confirmed Nicole's suspicion that threat awareness wasn't exclusively military territory. Even if the stakes in training differed dramatically, that feeling you got, the one that made you notice things differently, that's your survival instinct trying to protect you. Nicole continued, moving slowly around the edge of the semicircle as she spoke. Most people learn to ignore those signals because civilian life doesn't usually reward paranoia. But there's a difference between paranoia and awareness, and that difference can save your life. Kyle nodded, understanding, his black belt suddenly seeming less significant than the psychological insights he was receiving. His tournament experience had taught him to read opponents within sporting contexts. But Nicole was describing threat assessment on a completely different level. The kind of comprehensive environmental scanning that special operations required for survival. Carlos Johnson, the enthusiastic construction worker who had recently joined the academy, raised his hand tentatively. At 24, he brought blue-collar practicality to discussions that sometimes became too abstract for immediate application. How do you tell the difference between being careful and being scared of everything? The question revealed insight that surprised Nicole, cutting directly to the core challenge of translating military vigilance into civilian functionality. Her own struggle with hypervigilance had been complicated by exactly the distinction Carlos was asking about. The difficulty of maintaining appropriate caution without becoming paralyzed by fear. Practice, Nicole replied honestly, it's like developing any other skill. You start by consciously noticing things. Exits, people who seem out of place, unusual sounds or smells. Eventually it becomes automatic, but in a good way. You're not scared of everything. You're just aware of everything. Officer Mike Phillips, attending the session in civilian clothes during his off-duty hours, leaned forward with professional interest. His law enforcement background provided context for Nicole's instruction that most civilian students lacked. Though his experience with domestic threats differed significantly from her international operations background. In police work, we call it tactical awareness, Phillips added, but most civilians think it means being suspicious of everyone, which isn't healthy or practical. What Nicole's describing sounds more like developing good habits that become second nature. Nicole appreciated the support, recognizing that Phillips understood the nuanced difference between productive vigilance and destructive paranoia. His validation would help other students accept concepts that might otherwise seem too militaristic for civilian application. Mrs. Sanders surprised everyone by raising her arthritic hand, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had lived through decades of social change in Highland Park. Young lady, I've been using these skills since I was 16 and working late shifts at the diner downtown. We just called it paying attention instead of giving it fancy names. The observation drew chuckles from the group while reinforcing Nicole's central point that situational awareness wasn't exclusively military knowledge. Mrs. Sanders had developed similar skills through different life experiences, proving that threat assessment was fundamentally about human survival instincts rather than specialized training. Exactly, Nicole confirmed, grateful for the elderly woman's contribution. What I learned in the military was how to systematize and intensify natural survival instincts. But the basic concepts, trusting your gut, noticing when something feels wrong, having escape routes planned, those are things people have been doing forever. Bunner's hand shot up with the enthusiasm that 8-year-olds brought to classroom participation. His homework completely abandoned as he engaged with adult instruction that actually seemed relevant to his daily experience. Does this work against bullies at school? The question created immediate silence as everyone present recognized the personal stakes behind Connor's inquiry. Nicole found herself looking at the boy with new understanding, realizing that his interest in her background wasn't purely academic, but connected to practical concerns about his own safety and social navigation. What kind of bullying are you dealing with? Nicole asked gently, her tone shifting to accommodate the different dynamics of speaking directly to a child rather than addressing adult students. Connor glanced at his mother for permission before answering, receiving Rachel's encouraging nod to proceed with honesty. There's these kids who wait by the bike racks after school. They don't really hurt people, but they say mean things and make kids give them lunch money. I always have to find different ways to get home. The admission transformed the theoretical discussion into immediate practical application, providing concrete examples that grounded Nicole's instruction in real-world circumstances. Several adult students shifted uncomfortably, recognizing that Connor's bullying experience represented exactly the kind of situation where situational awareness could provide meaningful protection. That's a perfect example, Nicole said, crouching down to Connor's eye level. What you're already doing, finding different routes, avoiding places where you feel unsafe. That's tactical thinking. You're assessing threats and developing countermeasures. Kyle's expression showed dawning realization as he processed the connection between military tactics and elementary school social dynamics. His martial arts instruction had focused on physical techniques for dealing with violence after it occurred. But Nicole was describing prevention strategies that addressed threats before they escalated to physical confrontation. So, the goal isn't to fight the bullies, Kyle said slowly, working through implications that challenged his previous understanding of self-defense instruction. The goal is to avoid situations where fighting becomes necessary. Exactly. Nicole confirmed, rising to address the full group again. Physical confrontation should always be the last resort, not the first option. The best fight is the one that never happens because you saw it coming and took steps to avoid it. Travis Green, whose wrestling background had shaped his understanding of physical competition, raised his hand with obvious confusion. But isn't that kind of cowardly? I mean, if someone's threatening you, shouldn't you stand up to them? The question revealed the cultural tensions Nicole had expected to encounter when discussing military psychology with civilian audiences. American culture celebrated direct confrontation and physical courage, making it difficult to explain why professional warriors prioritized evasion over engagement whenever possible. There's a difference between cowardice and tactics, Nicole replied, her voice carrying the patience of someone who had explained similar concepts to young soldiers. Learning the difference between bravery and stupidity. Cowardice is running from necessary confrontation. Tactics is avoiding unnecessary confrontation. If I can complete my mission without fighting, that's not cowardice. That's effectiveness. Mrs. Sanders nodded approvingly, her decades of life experience providing validation for Nicole's perspective. Honey, I've been married 3 times, raised 4 children, and survived the Highland Park economy for 67 years. Sometimes the smartest thing you can do is walk away from a fight, even when you know you could win it. The elderly woman's endorsement carried weight that military authority alone couldn't provide, grounding Nicole's instruction in civilian wisdom that resonated with students who might otherwise dismiss tactical concepts as irrelevant to their daily lives. Officer Phillips leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful as he processed the intersection between law enforcement tactics and military psychology. In police work, we're trained to de-escalate whenever possible. Use of force is legally justified in certain circumstances, but it's always better if you can resolve situations without anyone getting hurt. Nicole appreciated the reinforcement, recognizing that Phillips understood the professional preference for nonviolent solutions that characterized both military and law enforcement operations. His perspective would help civilian students understand that avoiding confrontation wasn't weakness, but professional competence. The session was developing momentum that surprised Nicole, engaging students in ways she hadn't anticipated when she reluctantly agreed to Bell's suggestion. The combination of practical applications, diverse perspectives, and genuine curiosity was creating educational dynamics that felt more natural than the formal instruction she had expected to deliver. Let's try a practical exercise, Nicole announced, moving toward the center of the mat. I want everyone to stand up and look around this room. Take 30 seconds to notice everything you can. Exits, other people, unusual sounds, anything that catches your attention. Don't overthink it, just observe. The students complied with varying degrees of enthusiasm, some scanning the gymnasium with obvious intensity, while others appeared unsure about what they were supposed to notice. Connor participated with the focused attention that children brought to activities they found genuinely interesting, his 8-year-old eyes moving systematically around the space. When the 30 seconds concluded, Nicole began debriefing the exercise by asking students to share their observations. The responses revealed significant variation in natural awareness levels from Mrs. Sanders' comprehensive environmental assessment to younger students who had noticed primarily surface details. This is your baseline, Nicole explained after collecting their observations. Most of you noticed the obvious things, doors, windows, people you recognized. But awareness training means expanding what you naturally observe until it becomes automatic. The goal isn't to become hypervigilant, it's to become comprehensively alert. The distinction was crucial for civilian application, Nicole realized, requiring her to emphasize the difference between productive awareness and debilitating paranoia. Her own struggle with hypervigilance provided personal insight into how military alertness could become problematic in civilian contexts without proper management. As the first session concluded, Nicole felt cautiously optimistic about the teaching experiment. The students had engaged seriously with material that could easily have been dismissed as overly militaristic, finding practical applications that justified the psychological discomfort of increased awareness. Perhaps Bell's suggestion had been more insightful than she had initially recognized. The following Wednesday brought an unwelcome complication to Iron Dragon Academy in the form of Jennifer Hayes, whose press credentials and determined expression announced her professional intentions before she spoke. The 26-year-old reporter from Channel 7 News carried herself with the aggressive confidence that local journalism demanded, her perfectly styled blonde hair and television-ready makeup creating a stark contrast to the gymnasium's utilitarian atmosphere. Nicole spotted the reporter through the front windows and immediately retreated toward the back office, her instincts screaming warnings about media exposure that could compromise operational security protocols she still followed despite her retirement. The sight of professional camera equipment being unloaded from a news van triggered fight-or-flight responses that 3 years of civilian life hadn't completely suppressed. "Miss Bennett," Jennifer called out, her voice carrying the practiced authority of someone accustomed to pursuing reluctant interview subjects. "I'm Jennifer Hayes from Channel 7 News. I was hoping we could discuss your military service and how you're using those skills to help the Highland Park community." Rachel emerged from behind the front desk, positioning herself between Nicole and the reporter with the protective instincts of someone who had watched Nicole struggle with unwanted attention over the past week. Her expression mixed politeness with firm boundaries, the diplomatic approach she used when dealing with aggressive parents or unreasonable vendors. "I'm sorry, but Nicole doesn't do interviews," Rachel said calmly. "She's made that very clear to everyone who's asked. If you're interested in the Academy's programs, I'd be happy to discuss those with you." Jennifer's smile remained professionally bright despite the deflection, her media training evident in the way she maintained eye contact while assessing alternative approaches to her story. "I understand privacy concerns, but our viewers are very interested in veterans who are making positive contributions to their communities. Surely, a few questions wouldn't hurt." Master Henderson appeared from his office with the deliberate steps of someone prepared to enforce his property rights against unwelcome intrusion. His weathered face showed no hospitality toward the reporter, his military background providing clear understanding of why Nicole wanted to avoid media attention. "Ma'am, you're on private property without permission," Henderson stated firmly. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave unless you're here to sign up for classes." Jennifer's expression flickered with frustration before reasserting professional composure, her experience with resistant sources evident in the way she shifted tactics rather than accepting immediate defeat. "What about you, Master Henderson? Surely you can speak to how having someone with Miss Bennett's background has enhanced your programs." The question was clever, Nicole admitted reluctantly, attempting to gather information through secondary sources when primary access was denied. Henderson's face remained impassive, though his military bearing suggested he understood the reporter's strategy and wasn't impressed by her persistence. "No comment," Henderson replied curtly. "Now please leave or I'll call the police to escort you off the property." Kyle emerged from the changing area wearing his teaching uniform, his afternoon class scheduled to begin in 15 minutes. His transformation over the past 2 weeks had been remarkable, but the presence of a news reporter tested his new humility in ways that quiet academy discussions never could. His face showed recognition of the reporter, though Nicole couldn't tell whether his expression reflected concern or opportunity. "Kyle Fisher," Jennifer said immediately, redirecting her attention toward what appeared to be a more cooperative subject. "I understand you had a learning experience with Ms. Bennett recently. Could you share what that was like?" Kyle glanced toward the back office where Nicole had taken refuge, his internal conflict visible as he weighed loyalty against the ego gratification that media attention could provide. The old Kyle would have seized the opportunity for television exposure without considering consequences. But his recent education and humility had complicated his relationship with public recognition. "I learned that I had a lot to learn," Kyle said carefully, his words chosen with unusual precision. "But Nicole's privacy is more important than my story, so I think you should respect her wishes about interviews." Nicole felt genuine surprise at Kyle's response, recognizing that his transformation had progressed further than she had realized. The man who had publicly challenged her 2 weeks earlier was now protecting her privacy at the cost of personal publicity, demonstrating character growth that impressed everyone present. Jennifer's frustration became more apparent as her potential sources unified in resistance to her story angle, but her professionalism prevented her from abandoning the pursuit entirely. "What about the self-defense classes I heard about? Surely, public safety instruction is a matter of community interest." The question touched on Nicole's greatest fear about media coverage, the transformation of tactical instruction into sensationalized entertainment that missed the serious psychological and legal implications of combat training. Her sessions with Academy students had been carefully structured to avoid exactly the kind of misrepresentation that television news typically generated. Connor burst through the front door with his usual after-call energy, stopping short when he noticed the stranger with professional camera equipment. His 8-year-old instincts immediately identified the reporter as someone important, though his understanding of media dynamics remained limited to cartoon representations of journalism. "Are you here to put Nicole on television?" Connor asked with characteristic directness, his question cutting through adult diplomatic maneuvering to address the core issue. "Because she doesn't like being famous." She told me that famous people have to smile all the time, even when they're sad. The innocent observation revealed depths of understanding that surprised the adults, suggesting that Connor had been paying closer attention to Nicole's psychological state than anyone had realized. His comment also provided insight into Nicole's perspective that she had never articulated directly, explaining her resistance to publicity in terms that even an 8-year-old could understand. Jennifer's expression softened slightly at Connor's intervention, her maternal instincts responding to childhood honesty, even as her professional drive remained focused on developing her story. "That's very thoughtful of you," she said gently. "But sometimes sharing stories about heroes helps other people feel safer." "Nicole's not a hero," Connor replied with 8-year-old logic that adults often found uncomfortably accurate. "Heroes are in movies. Nicole's just really good at helping people, and helping people is supposed to be private so it doesn't turn into showing off." The child's philosophical insight created silence among the adults, each processing implications that hadn't occurred to them during more sophisticated discussions of privacy and publicity. Connor had distilled the essential conflict between genuine service and public recognition in ways that revealed the fundamental tension Nicole felt about community engagement. Mrs. Helen Sanders chose that moment to arrive for her weekly private lesson. Her 67 years of Highland Park residence, providing immediate context for the reporter's presence. The elderly woman's expression showed no surprise at finding media attention focused on the academy, suggesting that small-town gossip networks had prepared her for exactly this development. "Jenny Hayes," Mrs. Sanders said with the familiarity that came from watching local reporters grow up in small communities. "I remember when your mother brought you to Highland Park Elementary. Now look at you all grown up and chasing stories like your daddy used to do for the Gazette." The personal connection shifted dynamics in ways that professional journalism training hadn't prepared Jennifer to handle, transforming her from anonymous media representative into community member whose family history was part of Highland Park's collective memory. Mrs. Sanders' recognition carried both warmth and subtle warning about the responsibilities that came with local connections. "Mrs. Sanders," Jennifer replied respectfully, her aggressive pursuit of the story tempered by awareness that Highland Park's social networks extended far beyond professional considerations. "I'm just trying to understand how someone with Ms. Bennett's background is contributing to community safety." Mrs. Sanders nodded understanding while positioning herself protectively near the back office where Nicole remained hidden from camera range. "Honey, some contributions are more valuable when they don't turn into publicity. Nicole's been helping people learn to pay attention to their surroundings. And that's important work, but it stops being helpful if it becomes a circus." The elderly woman's defense carried authority that professional journalism couldn't easily challenge. Grounded in decades of community involvement that predated Jennifer's career by multiple generations, her perspective represented Highland Park's collective wisdom about when media attention helped and when it complicated situations that were better handled privately. Officer Mike Phillips arrived for his scheduled session wearing civilian clothes but carrying the unmistakable bearing that identified him as law enforcement even when off-duty. His presence added another layer to the developing confrontation, representing official authority that could complicate Jennifer's story angle if he decided to support Nicole's privacy concerns. "Everything okay here?" Phillips asked, his tone carrying the neutral professionalism that police officers used when assessing potentially problematic situations. His eyes moved between Jennifer's camera equipment and the defensive positioning of academy staff, reading body language that suggested conflict despite the superficially polite conversation. Jennifer recognized the implicit warning in Phillips' question, understanding that continued pressure on unwilling interview subjects could create legal complications that would undermine her story rather than enhancing it. Her media training included clear guidance about when persistence became harassment, boundaries that law enforcement presence made impossible to ignore. "Just trying to do a story about community veterans," Jennifer replied carefully, her tone acknowledging Phillips' authority while maintaining professional justification for her presence. "But I understand privacy concerns, so I'll respect Miss Bennett's wishes about interviews." The concession represented victory for Nicole's supporters, though Jennifer's expression suggested she wasn't abandoning her story entirely. Local journalism's competitive dynamics required her to find alternative angles when primary sources proved uncooperative, meaning that Nicole's privacy might be temporary rather than permanently secured. Nicole emerged from the back office, recognizing that continued hiding would only increase speculation about her background and motivations. Her face showed resignation rather than acceptance, the expression of someone who understood that media attention was probably inevitable, but wanted to control its parameters as much as possible. 5 minutes. Nicole said firmly, her voice carrying command authority that made Jennifer straighten involuntarily. "No cameras, no recording, just questions and answers. And when I say we're done, we're done." Jennifer nodded eagerly, recognizing that limited access was better than no access. Though her frustration with the restrictions was obvious, she gestured for her cameraman to wait outside. Understanding that Nicole's conditions were non-negotiable, the compromise satisfied no one completely, but provided a framework for managing media attention that protected Nicole's essential privacy while acknowledging the legitimate community interest in her story. As the adults arranged chairs for an informal interview, Connor remained nearby with the focused attention of someone who understood that important adult business was about to unfold. The brief media encounter would shape how Highland Park understood Nicole's role in the community, but the parameters she had established would determine whether that understanding enhanced her ability to contribute or compromised the careful balance she had spent weeks developing between visibility and privacy. The controlled interview lasted exactly 5 minutes, during which Nicole provided careful responses that acknowledged her military service without revealing operational details or expressing enthusiasm for public recognition. Jennifer Hayes left Iron Dragon Academy with enough material for a brief human interest segment, but insufficient content for the feature story she had originally envisioned. Her professional disappointment evident despite her gracious farewell. 2 days later, the Channel 7 news segment aired during the evening broadcast, presenting Nicole as a modest local veteran who preferred helping her community quietly rather than seeking recognition for her service. The piece lasted 90 seconds and focused more on the Academy's traditional programs than Nicole's specialized instruction, though it did mention her background as a decorated Navy SEAL. The broadcast's restrained approach surprised Nicole, who had expected sensationalized coverage that emphasized combat capabilities over community contribution. Jennifer's professionalism had apparently overcome her initial aggressive pursuit of the story, resulting in coverage that respected the boundaries Nicole had established, while satisfying viewer curiosity about Highland Park's unexpected resident. Saturday morning brought consequences Nicole hadn't anticipated, arriving in the form of Blake Cooper, whose 19-year-old arrogance and newly acquired brown belt created a volatile combination that threatened the careful equilibrium she had been building with Kyle and the Academy's regular students. The teenager had missed Nicole's revelation in subsequent teaching sessions, creating a dangerous knowledge gap about her actual capabilities and background. Blake swaggered into Iron Dragon Academy with the kind of calculated disrespect that teenagers used to test adult authority figures. His expensive martial arts gear, creating a costume that he wore like armor against perceived criticism. His sandy hair was styled with product that cost more than Nicole's weekly grocery budget, and his movements carried the aggressive confidence of someone who had never faced serious consequences for bad behavior. "So you're the famous cleaning lady," Blake announced, his voice pitched loud enough to draw attention from other students preparing for Saturday morning classes. "Heard you got lucky against Kyle and now everyone thinks you're some kind of badass." Kyle, adjusting equipment near the front desk, stiffened at Blake's comment but didn't immediately intervene. His transformation over the previous weeks had included learning when to let situations develop naturally rather than rushing to assert authority. Though his expression showed concern about Blake's confrontational approach, Nicole continued organizing training materials for her weekly awareness session. Her movements unchanged by Blake's provocation, she had encountered countless young soldiers who confused aggression with strength. Learning that engaging their challenges often validated exactly the behavior that needed correction. Kyle called out, his voice carrying warning that his student chose to ignore. "Show some respect." "Respect for what?" Blake replied, circling Nicole like a predator testing potential prey. "She's a janitor who got lucky in one sparring match. That doesn't make her qualified to teach anything to anyone." Master Henderson emerged from his office, drawn by the tension that was building between his newest problem student and the woman who had become an unexpected asset to his academy. His weathered face showed the kind of patience that came from decades of managing difficult personalities. Though his military bearing suggested limits to that patience, Mrs. Sanders arrived for her weekly session, taking in the confrontational scene with the sharp assessment of someone who had witnessed similar dynamics throughout her 67 years in Highland Park. Her expression showed disapproval for Blake's behavior mixed with curiosity about how the adults would handle his disrespect. "Young man," Mrs. Sanders said firmly, her voice carrying the authority that Highland Park senior citizens wielded over community members they had watched grow up. "Your parents raised you better than this. I suggest you remember your manners before you embarrass yourself." Blake's smirk faltered slightly at Mrs. Sanders' intervention, his teenage bravado complicated by lifelong conditioning to respect elderly community members. However, his need to maintain face in front of other students overcame his better judgment, pushing him toward confrontation despite clear warnings from multiple authority figures. "This isn't about manners," Blake replied, his tone defensive but still aggressive. "This is about not pretending that someone's military service automatically makes them qualified to teach martial arts. I've been training seriously for 3 years, and I'm not going to take lessons from someone who learned to fight in the desert." The comment revealed fundamental misunderstanding about Nicole's background that created dangerous overconfidence in Blake's assessment of the situation. His dismissive reference to, quote, "While learning to fight in the desert," demonstrated ignorance about the level of training required for special operations units, reducing elite military preparation to casual civilian assumptions. Nicole finally looked up from her equipment organization, meeting Blake's eyes with the kind of steady attention that made smarter people reconsider their approach. Her expression held no anger, no offense, just the calm evaluation of someone assessing whether a situation required intervention or could be resolved through natural consequences. "What do you want?" Nicole asked quietly, her voice carrying none of the emotion that Blake was obviously trying to provoke. "I want to see what all the fuss is about," Blake replied, his confidence returning as he interpreted Nicole's calm as weakness rather than control. "Kyle says you taught him something about real fighting, so let's see it. Unless you're afraid to face someone who actually knows what they're doing." The challenge was explicit this time, issued publicly in front of witnesses who would make backing down psychologically difficult for either party. Kyle stepped forward, recognizing that Blake's arrogance was creating exactly the kind of situation that could result in serious injury if not managed properly. "Blake, you don't understand what you're asking for," Kyle warned, his voice carrying genuine concern rather than authoritarian posturing. "Nicole's background is completely different from anything we do here. This isn't a good idea." "Why?" Blake demanded, his teenage logic reducing complex considerations to simple questions. "If she's really that good, she should be able to handle a sparring match with someone my size." Unless all these stories about her being some kind of super soldier or just Master Henderson moved closer to the developing confrontation, positioning himself where he could intervene physically if necessary. His military experience provided clear understanding that Blake's overconfidence was creating potential for violence that would serve no educational purpose while risking genuine harm. Nicole stood slowly, her movements carrying the kind of deliberate precision that those who knew her recognized as preparation rather than casual adjustment. Her green eyes remained fixed on Blake's face, reading micro-expressions that revealed his psychological state with the accuracy that special operations training had developed to near supernatural levels. "You're 19, Nicole observed, her voice remaining conversational despite the tension building around them. "You've been training for 3 years. You think your brown belt means you understand fighting. And you think challenging me proves something about your skill or my weakness." Blake nodded eagerly, interpreting Nicole's summary as acceptance of his challenge rather than preliminary assessment of his motivations. His body language shifted into preparatory mode, muscles tensing in anticipation of physical confrontation that would validate his martial arts training. "All of that is wrong," Nicole continued, her tone carrying the patient instruction she might use with a student making fundamental errors in understanding. "Your belt represents technical knowledge, not combat experience. Your training has been in controlled environments with safety rules and weight classes. And challenging me doesn't prove anything except that you don't understand the difference between sport and violence." Connor had arrived with his mother, immediately sensing the adult tension that filled the gymnasium. His 8-year-old instincts recognized danger in ways that formal education couldn't teach, prompting him to move closer to his mother while watching the confrontation with worried fascination. "Are they going to fight?" Connor whispered, his voice carrying the kind of concern that children expressed when adult behavior seemed to be moving beyond normal boundaries. Rachel put her arm around Connor protectively, her maternal instincts responding to the aggressive energy that Blake was projecting toward Nicole. Her experience managing the academy had exposed her to occasional personality conflicts between students, but nothing approaching the level of potential violence that seemed to be developing. Officer Phillips arrived for his weekend session, immediately reading the confrontational dynamics through professional experience with similar situations. His law enforcement background provided clear understanding that Blake's aggressive posture and Nicole's controlled preparation were creating conditions for violence that could have legal consequences regardless of who initiated physical contact. "Everyone take a step back," Phillips commanded, his voice carrying official authority that made the gymnasium feel suddenly smaller. "Blake, you need to cool down, Nicole. You don't need to prove anything to anyone." Blake's frustration increased at Phillips' intervention, his teenage sense of injustice flaring at what he perceived as a dull conspiracy to deny him the confrontation he thought he deserved. His face flushed with anger that made him look younger despite his athletic build and advanced belt ranking. "This is ridiculous," Blake snapped, his voice cracking slightly under the pressure of sustained adult attention. "I'm not some little kid who needs protection. I'm a serious martial artist. And I have the right to test myself against anyone who claims to be better." Nicole's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, her evaluation of Blake's character reaching conclusions that would determine her response to his continued provocation. She saw past his aggressive posture to the insecurity that drove his need for validation, recognizing patterns she had observed in young soldiers who confused violence with strength. You have the right to make mistakes, Nicole replied calmly, but you don't have the right to force other people to participate in your education. If you want to learn something, ask questions. If you want to prove something, find an appropriate venue, but don't confuse my willingness to teach with obligation to entertain your ego. The response surprised Blake, who had expected either acceptance of his challenge or defensive refusal that he could interpret as weakness. Instead, Nicole had reframed the entire interaction in terms that made his aggression appear childish rather than threatening. Deflating his confrontational energy without engaging his physical challenge, Master Henderson stepped forward, recognizing that the situation required clear resolution before it could escalate further. His academy's reputation depended on maintaining environments where learning could occur without the kind of toxic competition that Blake was trying to introduce. Blake, you're suspended from classes until you can demonstrate appropriate respect for instructors and fellow students, Henderson announced firmly. When you're ready to apologize to Nicole and commit to better behavior, you can discuss returning to training. The disciplinary action shocked Blake, who had expected his challenge to result in either victory or at worst, a draw that maintained his standing within the academy's social hierarchy. Instead, he found himself excluded from the community he had been trying to impress, isolated by behavior that had seemed reasonable from his teenage perspective. This is unfair, Blake protested, his voice carrying the outrage that young people felt when consequences exceeded their expectations. All I wanted was a fair test of skills. How is that wrong? Mrs. Sanders approached Blake with the combination of firmness and compassion that Highland Park's elders used when correcting community members who had lost their way. Her expression mixed disappointment with hope for redemption, suggesting that his current behavior could be overcome through proper guidance and genuine remorse. Son, Mrs. Sanders said gently, there's a difference between testing yourself and disrespecting others. Nicole has been generous with her knowledge and patient with our questions. You don't repay that generosity by demanding she prove herself to you. Blake's anger began to deflate under Mrs. Sanders' measured response, his teenage rebellion complicated by lifelong respect for Highland Park senior community members. Her disappointment carried more weight than Master Henderson's disciplinary action, representing social consequences that extended beyond martial arts training. The confrontation had revealed important truths about the academy's evolving dynamics while testing Nicole's commitment to constructive engagement with the Highland Park community. Blake's suspension would send clear messages about acceptable behavior, but his eventual return would require the kind of genuine character development that couldn't be mandated through rules alone. 3 weeks after Blake's suspension, Iron Dragon Academy had settled into rhythms that felt more sustainable than the emotional turbulence that had characterized Nicole's initial exposure to community attention. Her weekly awareness sessions had developed a core group of regular attendees who approached the instruction with genuine seriousness rather than curiosity about her military background, creating the kind of focused learning environment she had hoped to achieve. Donna Roberts arrived early for Thursday evening's session, her work-worn hands carrying notebooks filled with observations from practicing situational awareness techniques during her daily routine as Highland Park's most reliable babysitter. At 45, she brought practical experience with neighborhood dynamics that complemented Nicole's tactical knowledge, often asking questions that revealed civilian applications Nicole hadn't considered. I tried that door positioning thing you taught us, Donna reported, settling into one of the folding chairs that had been arranged in the academy's consultation area. You know, always sitting where I can see exits when I'm waiting for parents to pick up kids. And yesterday at the grocery store, I noticed this guy who was following too close behind people in the aisles. Turned out he was shoplifting and the manager said my tip helped them catch him. Nicole nodded approvingly, recognizing that Donna's success represented exactly the kind of practical application she had hoped her instruction would generate. The middle-aged woman's keen observation skills were being sharpened by systematic training, creating enhanced security awareness that benefited the entire Highland Park community. Carlos Johnson looked up from stretching exercises near the mat, his construction worker's practical mindset evident in the way he approached Nicole's instruction with the same methodical attention he applied to building projects. That's exactly what you meant about awareness becoming automatic, right? Donna wasn't trying to catch a thief. She just noticed something that didn't fit the normal pattern. Exactly. Nicole confirmed, appreciating Carlos' understanding of how tactical awareness functioned in civilian environments. The goal isn't to become a vigilante or to suspect everyone of criminal activity. It's to develop pattern recognition that helps you notice when something is unusual enough to deserve attention. Dr. Michelle Ward entered the gymnasium with the brisk efficiency that characterized her medical practice, though her participation in Nicole's sessions represented personal interest rather than professional obligation. At 38, she had developed her own situational awareness through years of emergency room work, recognizing behavioral patterns that often preceded violence or medical emergencies. Speaking of pattern recognition, Dr. Ward interjected, I've started applying some of these concepts to patient assessment. There are subtle cues that indicate when someone might become violent or unstable, and your instruction has helped me identify those signals earlier than I used to. The medical application impressed Nicole, demonstrating how tactical awareness could enhance professional capabilities in fields completely unrelated to law enforcement or military operations. Dr. Ward's success suggested broader applications for situational awareness training than Nicole had originally envisioned when she reluctantly agreed to begin instruction. Master Henderson approached the group with purposeful steps, his weathered face showing the satisfaction of someone whose business decisions were producing positive results. The Academy's enrollment had increased steadily since Nicole's teaching had become regular programming, attracting students who were genuinely interested in practical self-defense concepts rather than traditional martial arts competition. We've got a situation developing, Henderson announced without preamble, his military background evident in the way he delivered potentially problematic information with straightforward efficiency. Blake's been training at that new mud gym in Riverside, and word is he's planning some kind of public challenge to prove he doesn't need our amateur instruction. The news created immediate tension among Nicole's regular students, who had developed protective instincts toward her. Despite her obvious capability for self-defense, Blake's suspension had become Highland Park gossip, with various versions of the story circulating through social networks that often bore little resemblance to actual events. Officer Phillips, changing from his patrol uniform into civilian training clothes, paused to consider the implications of Blake's reported activities. His law enforcement experience provided context for how private disputes could escalate into public disturbances that required official intervention, especially when teenage egos were involved. What kind of public challenge? Phillips asked, his tone carrying professional concern about potential legal consequences. Because depending on what he's planning, this could move beyond academy business into criminal territory. Nicole felt familiar weight settling in her chest, the kind of operational stress that accompanied situations where personal preferences conflicted with larger responsibilities. Blake's continued antagonism represented exactly the kind of public spectacle she had hoped to avoid when she agreed to begin community instruction. Connor burst through the Academy's front door with his usual after-school energy, immediately sensing the adult tension that filled the consultation area. His 8-year-old instincts had become remarkably accurate at reading emotional atmosphere since Nicole's background had been revealed, developing awareness skills that impressed the adults who observed his behavior. Is something bad happening? Connor asked directly, his question cutting through diplomatic adult conversation to address core concerns. Everyone looks worried, and worried means something might be dangerous. Rachel followed her son into the gymnasium, her expression showing the kind of maternal alertness that activated when potential threats to community stability emerged. Her management of the academy had exposed her to various personality conflicts over the years, but nothing approaching the level of persistent antagonism that Blake appeared to be developing. Nothing you need to worry about, Rachel assured Connor, though her tone suggested concerns that extended beyond immediate safety issues. Some people just have trouble accepting when they're wrong about things. Mrs. Sanders arrived precisely on time for her weekly session, moving with the careful dignity that characterized Highland Park's senior population. Her 67 years of community involvement provided historical perspective on how personal disputes could escalate into tone-wide conflicts if not managed properly, making her voice particularly valuable in discussions about Blake's behavior. That boy's always been trouble, Mrs. Sanders observed, settling into her preferred chair near the American flag. His parents spoiled him rotten, and now he can't handle being told no about anything. But making public scenes isn't just his problem, it becomes everyone's problem. Kyle emerged from teaching his evening class. Students filing past toward the changing area while he approached the consultation group with obvious concern. His transformation since Nicole's revelation had been profound, but Blake's antagonism created tests of his new humility that required constant vigilance against old patterns of competitive response. I heard rumors at the high school, Kyle reported, his voice carrying reluctance to share information that might escalate the situation. Some of Blake's friends are talking about organizing a real fight between him and Nicole to settle who's actually tougher. They're treating it like some kind of entertainment event. The revelation confirmed Henderson's intelligence while revealing the extent to which Blake's grievance had metastasized beyond personal dispute into public spectacle. The transformation from individual conflict to community entertainment created complications that extended far beyond martial arts academy politics. Nicole stood slowly, her movements carrying the kind of controlled precision that her regular students had learned to recognize as preparation for decision-making rather than physical action. Her face showed resignation mixed with determination, the expression of someone accepting responsibilities she had hoped to avoid. Where and when? Nicole asked quietly, her voice carrying command authority that made everyone present straighten involuntarily. Saturday afternoon behind the old Riverside shopping center, Kyle replied reluctantly. Blake's been telling people that if Nicole doesn't show up, it proves all the stories about her military service are exaggerated. The challenge's public nature transformed it from personal dispute into community credibility test, creating pressures that Nicole's protective instincts couldn't ignore. Her instruction at Iron Dragon Academy had built relationships based on respect and trust, values that would be undermined if she appeared to be avoiding legitimate confrontation. Dr. Ward leaned forward, her medical training evident in the way she approached the situation from risk assessment perspective. Nicole, you don't have to prove anything to anyone, especially not to some teenager who's been training at a gym for a few weeks. This is about Blake's ego, not about your reputation. It's not that simple, Nicole replied, her voice carrying layers of consideration that civilian perspectives might miss. If I don't address this directly, Blake's version of events becomes the default story. And his version will probably include claims that I'm afraid to face someone with real training. Captain Bell's voice came from the Academy's entrance, his arrival perfectly timed to participate in discussions about Nicole's situation. Then we make sure you address it on your terms, not his. Bell announced, his command presence immediately altering the room's dynamics. Blake wants a spectacle, but that doesn't mean you have to give him one. Bell's unexpected appearance suggested that Highland Park's military veteran network had been monitoring the developing situation, recognizing potential implications that extended beyond personal conflict into broader questions about veteran integration and community support. His intervention carried authority that could reshape how the confrontation developed. Tom, Nicole said, her relief at seeing her former commander evident despite her attempt to maintain emotional control. I wasn't expecting backup. You've got a whole community watching your back. Bell replied, gesturing toward the assembled group of Nicole's students and supporters. The question isn't whether you can handle Blake. Obviously you can. The question is how to handle him in a way that serves the community's interests while protecting your own well-being. Mrs. Sanders nodded approvingly at Bell's assessment, her community elder status, providing validation for approaches that balanced individual needs against collective welfare. That boy needs to learn that actions have consequences, but the lesson shouldn't turn into a circus that embarrasses everyone involved. The developing consensus suggested solutions that transcended simple confrontation, while addressing the underlying issues that Blake's behavior had created. Nicole found herself genuinely considering alternatives to direct physical engagement, recognizing that her regular students had become invested in outcomes that reflected their own understanding of what her instruction represented. Connor raised his hand with classroom formality, drawing adult attention to his 8-year-old perspective on the unfolding situation. If Blake is being a bully, why doesn't someone just tell his parents? That's what happens when kids at school won't stop bothering people. The innocent suggestion created silence among the adults who had been approaching Blake's behavior from complex perspectives that overlooked simpler solutions. Honor's childhood wisdom often cut through elaborate adult reasoning to identify practical approaches that sophisticated analysis might miss. Out of the mouths of babes, Bell murmured approvingly, his expression showing respect for Connor's directness. Sometimes the simplest solutions are the most effective ones. As the group continued discussing strategies for managing Blake's public challenge while protecting Nicole's hard-won integration into Highland Park's community, the gymnasium felt charged with collective determination to support one of their own against threats that extended beyond personal conflict into questions about how small towns honored and protected the veterans who chose to make their homes there. Saturday arrived with the kind of overcast sky that matched Highland Park's collective mood about the confrontation everyone hoped wouldn't happen. Nicole sat in her small apartment at Sunset Apartments, drinking coffee that had grown cold while she stared at tactical gear she hadn't touched since leaving active duty. The weight of community expectations pressed against her desire to handle Blake's challenge quietly, creating internal conflicts that no amount of military training had prepared her to navigate. Captain Bell's solution had been elegantly simple. Attend Blake's public challenge with enough community witnesses to ensure the encounter remained civilized while demonstrating Highland Park's unified support for Nicole. The strategy transformed Blake's intended humiliation into a teaching moment about respect, consequences, and the difference between courage and foolishness. At 11:30, Nicole arrived at the old Riverside shopping center to find a crowd that surprised her with its composition. Instead of the usual collection of thrill-seekers drawn to potential violence, Highland Park had sent its most respectable representatives, Master Henderson, Mrs. Sanders, Officer Phillips in uniform, Dr. Ward with her medical bag, and even Mayor Patricia Young, whose presence elevated the gathering from teenage spectacle to official community event. Blake stood near the loading dock of an abandoned department store, surrounded by a handful of teenagers and 20-somethings who had driven in from Riverside to witness what they expected would be entertaining amateur violence. His Numa training showed in his more aggressive stance and the tribal tattoos that decorated his recently muscled forearms. But his eyes revealed uncertainty as Highland Park's establishment arrived in force. "Didn't expect a parade," Blake called out, his voice pitched loud enough to reach the growing crowd, but lacking the confident arrogance he had displayed during his academy suspension. The presence of Mayor Young and Officer Phillips had transformed his planned dominance display into something approaching official scrutiny, creating psychological pressure he hadn't anticipated. Nicole approached the makeshift arena with measured steps, her civilian clothes concealing nothing about her readiness for violence while advertising nothing about her intentions. She had chosen simple jeans and a long-sleeved shirt that covered her tattoos, presenting the same unremarkable appearance that had allowed her to remain invisible for 3 years. "Blake," Nicole said calmly, stopping just outside striking distance while maintaining relaxed posture that suggested confidence without threat. "This is your last chance to walk away from something you're not prepared to handle. No shame in changing your mind when you realize you've made a mistake." The offer of graceful retreat carried more authority than any physical demonstration could have provided. Backed by the silent witness of Highland Park's most respected citizens, Blake's supporters from Riverside began to sense that their anticipated entertainment was developing complications that extended beyond simple fighting into complex social dynamics they didn't understand. Mrs. Sanders stepped forward with the kind of maternal authority that Highland Park's residents had respected since childhood, her 67 years of community involvement providing weight that transcended Blake's temporary rebellion against adult guidance. Her expression mixed disappointment with hope for redemption, suggesting that even now better choices remained possible. "Blake Cooper, Mrs. Sanders said firmly, using his full name with the emphasis that Highland Park elders employ when addressing community members who had lost their way. "Your grandmother would be ashamed to see you making a spectacle of yourself like this. She raised you better and you know it." The invocation of family honor hit Blake harder than physical confrontation could have managed, connecting his current behavior to generational expectations about dignity and respect that ran deeper than teenage rebellion. His face flushed with embarrassment that had nothing to do with physical intimidation and everything to do with social accountability. Connor appeared at Nicole's side, having somehow convinced his mother to bring him. Despite the potentially volatile nature of the gathering, his 8-year-old presence added another layer of complexity to Blake's challenge, transforming adult confrontation into something that would be witnessed and remembered by the next generation of Highland Park residents. "Blake," Connor said, with the kind of directness that only children could deploy without social consequences, "why are you trying to hurt someone who helps people? That doesn't make sense." The innocent question cut through elaborate justifications that Blake had constructed for his public challenge, reducing complex grievances about respect and recognition to simple moral clarity that even a child could understand. Connor's confusion about adult behavior carried more sting than any accusation could have delivered. Blake's supporters from Riverside began shifting uncomfortably as they realized that their anticipated entertainment had evolved into something resembling community intervention rather than sporting event. The presence of Highland Park's mayor, police officer, and senior citizens created witness accountability that transformed casual violence into behavior with lasting consequences. "This is ridiculous," Blake muttered, his voice lacking the conviction that had characterized his earlier provocations. "I just wanted a fair test of skills. Now it's turned into some kind of town meeting." Captain Bell approached the group with military bearing that immediately commanded attention from both factions, his presence representing authority that transcended local politics or personal grievances. His weathered face showed the kind of patient determination that came from years of managing personnel who confused aggression with strength. "Son," Bell said quietly, directing his attention toward Blake while maintaining awareness of the crowd dynamics. "There's nothing fair about challenging someone to prove capabilities you don't understand for reasons that serve no purpose except feeding your ego. Nicole has nothing to prove to you or anyone else, then why is she here?" Blake demanded, his teenage logic reducing complex social dynamics to simple questions that adults seem determined to complicate with unnecessary considerations. "Because the community she serves deserves to see how real warriors handle provocation from children who think they understand violence." Bell replied evenly, his words carrying enough steel to make Blake step backward involuntarily. Mayor Young cleared her throat diplomatically, her political experience providing framework for managing public gatherings that threatened to become disorderly without achieving any constructive purpose. As Highland Park's elected representative, she bore responsibility for ensuring that community conflicts were resolved in ways that strengthened rather than divided social cohesion. "Blake, you have two choices," Mayor Young announced, her voice carrying official authority that made the gathering feel suddenly formal. "You can apologize to Nicole and to this community for wasting everyone's time with juvenile theatrics. Or you can face the legal consequences of public disorder and disturbing the peace." The ultimatum transformed Blake's challenge from personal grievance into potential criminal matter, creating stakes that extended far beyond martial arts academy politics into consequences that could affect his future employment, education, and social standing within the broader Highland Park community. Nicole watched Blake's internal struggle with the patience of someone who had seen young soldiers confront the gap between their assumptions and reality in environments where mistakes carried permanent consequences. Her expression held no triumph, no satisfaction in his obvious distress, only the kind of weary compassion that came from understanding how easily pride could lead people into situations they weren't equipped to handle. Blake, Nicole said gently, her voice carrying none of the authority she could have deployed, but all of the understanding that came from watching others face similar moments of truth. This isn't about winning or losing, it's about learning when to stop digging a hole that's already deeper than you can climb out of. The metaphor resonated with Blake's construction worker background, connecting abstract concepts about pride and consequences to practical experience with projects that could become unsalvageable if pursued beyond the point of reasonable recovery. His face showed recognition of the wisdom embedded in Nicole's advice, even as his ego struggled against accepting guidance from someone he had been trying to defeat. Mrs. Sanders stepped closer to Blake, her maternal instincts overriding whatever frustration she felt about his behavior. Her hand touched his arm with the kind of gentle contact that Highland Park's elders used to remind community members that they remained part of the collective family despite temporary lapses in judgment. "Come home, Blake," Mrs. Sanders said softly, her words carrying invitation rather than command. "This community has room for you to grow and learn, but not if you keep trying to tear down people who are trying to help others." The elderly woman's forgiveness broke something in Blake that confrontation never could have touched, connecting him to childhood memories of unconditional acceptance and community belonging that his recent behavior had been rejecting. Tears began forming in his eyes as the weight of his isolation finally overcame his determination to prove himself through conflict. "I'm sorry," Blake whispered, his voice barely audible but carrying genuine remorse that surprised everyone present, including himself. "I'm sorry for being an ass. I'm sorry for wasting everyone's time. I'm sorry for disrespecting you, Nicole." The apology transformed the gathering from potential conflict into community healing, demonstrating Highland Park's capacity for redemption that extended even to members who had temporarily lost their way. Nicole approached Blake slowly, extending her hand in the kind of gesture that marked the end of hostilities and the beginning of possible reconciliation. "Apology accepted," Nicole said simply, her handshake firm but not punishing. "Now the real work begins, figuring out how to channel all that energy into something constructive instead of destructive." Master Henderson stepped forward, recognizing that Blake's public apology created opportunity for meaningful reintegration rather than continued isolation. His academy had always emphasized discipline and respect alongside physical technique, values that Blake's recent education had finally made accessible to serious consideration. "Blake, your suspension is lifted," Henderson announced, his decision surprising many observers, but reflecting confidence in the sincerity of Blake's transformation. "But you'll be starting over as a white belt, learning respect before you advance in technique." The disciplinary reset was more humbling than continued suspension would have been, requiring Blake to acknowledge publicly that his advanced ranking had been based on technical knowledge without the character development that should have accompanied martial arts progression. However, it also offered genuine opportunity for growth that permanent exclusion could never have provided. Connor looked up at Nicole with the wide-eyed admiration that 8-year-olds reserve for adults who handle difficult situations with wisdom rather than force. "You didn't have to fight him," Connor observed with the kind of innocent insight that often revealed truths that sophisticated analysis missed. "The best victories don't require fighting," Nicole replied, crouching down to Connor's level to deliver wisdom that would shape his understanding of conflict resolution for years to come. "Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is help someone find a better path instead of proving they chose the wrong one." As the crowd began to disperse, Highland Park's residents carried with them renewed respect for the quiet veteran who had chosen their community as her home. The confrontation that could have divided them had instead demonstrated the values that bound them together: forgiveness, accountability, and the recognition that true strength served others rather than simply proving itself. Nicole walked back toward her apartment with Captain Bell beside her, both veterans understanding that the morning's events had marked not just Blake's growth, but her own transition from hidden survivor to engaged community member. The careful balance she had spent months developing between privacy and contribution had shifted toward greater involvement, though on terms she had finally learned to control. "Think he'll stick with the program?" Bell asked, glancing back toward Blake, who was receiving enthusiastic guidance from Mrs. Sanders about his next steps toward genuine rehabilitation. "We'll see," Nicole replied, her tone carrying cautious optimism rather than certainty. But Highland Park gave him something to fight for instead of something to fight against. That makes all the difference. The transformation was complete for both Blake and Nicole, marking the end of one chapter in Highland Park's story and the beginning of another. The quiet cleaning lady who had shocked everyone with her hidden capabilities had evolved into something even more valuable. A teacher, protector, and full member of a community that had learned to recognize heroism in forms that didn't require publicity or recognition. Iron Dragon Academy would continue its mission with renewed purpose, guided by instruction that combined traditional martial arts with real-world wisdom about service, sacrifice, and the difference between fighting for ego and fighting for something worth protecting. And Nicole Bennett, former Navy SEAL and current Highland Park resident, had finally found the balance between honoring her past and building her future in a place that understood the value of both. The end. Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoy this one, you won't want to miss this. Just click to watch. And don't forget to subscribe, it would mean a lot.